A red shield above the gates of Frankfurt. An eye at the top of a pyramid. 5 arrows that cannot be broken. Behind these symbols lie stories of the greatest fortunes in human history and theories of the most grandiose conspiracies. Do Freemasons control global finance, or are they merely shadows of the past? Today, we will travel from the medieval guilds of Masons to the skyscrapers of Wall Street, from the Battle of Waterloo to secret meetings on Jekyll Island. Get ready to learn the truth about the dynasties that changed the course of history. If this story has made you think about the real mechanisms of power in the modern world, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Now here's a question for discussion in the comments. Do you think modern financial institutions should be more transparent and accountable to society? Or is the secrecy of the elites an inevitable part of any complex management system? Share your opinion. On July 27, 1694, an event took place in London that forever changed the global economy. Scottish merchant William Paterson received a royal charter to establish the Bank of England. This was not just the opening of another financial office. For the first time in history, an institution appeared that combined the functions of lending to the state with the right to issue money. King William III desperately needed funds for the war with France. The royal treasury was empty, and its reputation was tarnished by unfulfilled obligations. Traditional methods of borrowing did not work. No one wanted to lend money to an unreliable debtor. Paterson came up with an ingenious solution. He gathered 1,268 shareholders who provided $1.2 million at 8% per annum. In return, the new bank received unprecedented privileges: the right to operate as a limited liability company, the status of a government financial agency, and a de facto monopoly on banking activities throughout the country. It was not just a business, it was an alliance of money and power on new terms. As early as 1696, the Tory party attempted to establish a competing national bank, but failed. In 1697, Parliament passed a law prohibiting the creation of other large banks in England. Moreover, counterfeiting Bank of England notes became punishable by death. In 1708, the monopoly became even tighter. It was forbidden to issue bearer bonds, create companies with more than 6 partners, or provide short-term loans for up to 6 months. The model proved so successful that it began to be copied around the world. The Bank of Finland appeared in 1812, the Dutch Bank in 1814, and the National Bank of Austria in 1816. By the end of the 19th century, central banks were operating in most European countries. They did not just lend to governments, they began to determine the monetary policy of entire states. But behind these dry facts lies an important question. Who were the people who created these financial institutions? What connections existed between them? Why was it in England, the birthplace of modern Freemasonry, that the first modern-style central bank was established? Was this a coincidence or a pattern? To answer these questions, we need to understand what Freemasonry was and who belonged to it in the 18th century. The financial revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries created a new class of people. Bankers, merchants, and entrepreneurs accumulated capital independent of the landed aristocracy. They needed new forms of social connections and new networks of influence. It was at this time that Freemasonry transformed from a professional guild of Masons into a club for the elite. But was this a coincidence? On June 24, 1717, an event took place in London that united 4 Masonic lodges into the Grand Lodge of England. This is considered the official birth of modern speculative Freemasonry. but its roots go much deeper. Medieval guilds of Masons, who built cathedrals throughout Europe, kept their professional secrets. They passed on their knowledge only to the initiated, used special signs to identify their colleagues, and had their own hierarchy and rituals. By the 17th century, the cathedral building boom had ended. Professional associations of Masons began to accept people who were not involved in construction into their ranks. Aristocrats, philosophers, scientists, and later merchants and bankers. Thus, operative Freemasonry turned into speculative Freemasonry. From a craftsman's workshop to a philosophical club, from a guild to a secret society. The basic ideas of the new Freemasonry sounded revolutionary for their time. Belief in the great architect of the universe, but not tied to a specific religion. Ideas of brotherhood and equality, but within a strict hierarchy of degrees of initiation. A cult of reason and enlightenment, but shrouded in mystical rituals and secrecy. This attracted educated people of the Enlightenment era, Protestants and Catholics, aristocrats and bourgeois, scientists and politicians met in lodges. Freemasonry spread rapidly throughout Europe. By the middle of the 18th century, lodges were operating in France, Germany, Italy, Russia, and the American colonies. Membership in a lodge gave access to a closed network of contacts that extended beyond national borders. A Freemason who arrived in a foreign city could count on the help of brothers from the local lodge. It was the first truly international secular organization. It is important to understand the context of the era. The 18th century was a time of revolutionary changes in economics and politics. The feudal system was collapsing, capitalism was growing, and a bourgeoisie class was forming that demanded political rights. Masonic ideas of brotherhood, equality, and freedom coincided with the spirit of the times. It is not surprising that many of those who made the American and French revolutions were Freemasons. Washington, Franklin, Jefferson in America. Many figures of the French Revolution, but were the Freemasons the organizers of these revolutions or simply active participants of their time? This is a fundamental question. It is one thing to say that Freemasons were part of the political and financial elite. It is quite another to claim that they controlled historical processes from behind the scenes. To answer this question, we need to study specific people and specific events. And we should start with the most famous financial dynasty associated with Freemasonry. In the first half of the 18th century, in Frankfurt am Main, a boy named Mayer Amschel was born into a poor Jewish family. He did not have a surname, like most Jews in the Holy Roman Empire. His father traded in old coins and medals in the Jewish ghetto. When his father died, young Mayer had to give up his studies and earn a living on his own. The story of how the Rothschilds' fortune began may seem like a legend, but it is documented. Mayer Amschel began collecting old coins, medals that were no longer in circulation, coats of arms, and emblems from knightly armor at city dumps. He cleaned his finds, tidied them up, and sold them to collectors. The trick was to create organized collections. A set of rare coins was worth more than the sum of the individual coins. The added value came from systematization. This simple idea later became the basis of a financial empire. Mayer understood the main thing. Value is created not only by production, but also by organization, structuring, and creating a system. He applied the same principles to trading bills, bonds, and financial instruments, collecting scattered financial flows and selling them as an organized system. In 1760, Meyer Amschel Rothschild, as he began to call himself, taking the surname from the red shield on his family's house, opened his banking house in Frankfurt. He was only 16 years old. Through his connections with collectors, he gained access to Landgrave Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel, one of the richest rulers in Europe. The Landgrave earned his living by leasing soldiers to other states, effectively trading in human beings for war. Meyer became the Landgrave's financial agent, managing his capital, investing it at interest, and conducting complex multi-step operations. When the Napoleonic era began with its endless wars, Rothschild found himself at the center of financial flows. The warring parties needed money, loans, and the transfer of funds across borders. Meyer and his sons did just that, often serving both sides of the conflict at the same time. But most importantly, according to some sources, Meyer Amschel Rothschild was a 33rd-degree Freemason. This is the highest degree in the Scottish rite of Freemasonry. It gave him access to closed networks of influence throughout Europe. Masonic connections helped establish contacts with rulers, bankers, and politicians in different countries. In an era when communications were slow and borders changed frequently, such a network was invaluable. Before his death in 1812, Meyer Amschel Rothschild gathered his 5 sons and laid out a plan that would turn them into the most powerful financial dynasty in the world. Each would go to a major European financial center and open a branch of the family bank there. Amschel Meyer would remain in Frankfurt. Solomon Meyer would go to Vienna. Nathan Meyer would settle in London. Kalman Meyer would choose Naples. James Meyer would go to Paris. The emblem of the House of Rothschild was 5 crossed arrows. The symbol was simple and ingenious. One arrow is easy to break, but 5 together are indestructible. The brothers created not just a network of banks, but a single financial organism that worked like clockwork. Information circulated between branches at incredible speed. The Rothschilds had their own courier service, which was often faster than the official mail. Pigeons, messengers, agents in all capitals. The scheme worked flawlessly. If war was brewing in France, the Vienna branch could buy up bonds at a low price in advance, knowing that they would rise after victory. If the English government needed gold, the Paris bank would organize a secret transfer through the blockade. The Rothschilds could move capital faster than governments, bypassing customs and restrictions. By the middle of the 19th century, the family's capital was twice that of the French bank. The Rothschilds lent money to kings and emperors, financed the construction of railways, and bought mines and factories. They became an integral part of the European aristocracy, receiving baron titles and marrying the daughters of noble families. But they maintained one iron rule: only family members could manage the money. To prevent capital from leaving the clan, Meyer Amschel arranged marriages between cousins and second cousins. For this, the Rothschilds were accused of incest, but from a financial point of view, the strategy worked flawlessly. The fortune multiplied while remaining within the family. By the end of the 19th century, the Rothschilds controlled a significant portion of European finance. Their connection to Freemasonry is documented. Nathan Meyer Rothschild became a Freemason on October 24, 1802, in London, joining Emulation Lodge No. 21. This is confirmed by the archives of the Grand Lodge of England. Before that, Jews were rarely accepted into English Masonic lodges, usually joining lodges of lower status. The Rothschilds were among the first to overcome this barrier. It is important to understand that Freemasonry gave not so much power as access. Access to information, connections, and deals. In the closed world of the European elites of the 19th century, membership in the Right Lodge opened doors that were inaccessible to ordinary rich people. The Rothschilds understood this perfectly and took advantage of it. On June 18, 1815, near the Belgian village of Waterloo, the fate of Europe was decided. Napoleon Bonaparte's army fought against the combined forces commanded by the Duke of Wellington and Prussian Field Marshal Blücher. The outcome of the battle was unclear until the very end, but in London, hundreds of kilometers from the battlefield, an equally dramatic story unfolded, which became shrouded in legend and gave rise to numerous conspiracy theories. Nathan Mayer Rothschild, head of the London branch of the family bank, was on the London Stock Exchange on June 19th, when official news of the battle's outcome had not yet reached England. According to the most popular version of events, Rothschild had his own network of couriers, which worked faster than the government mail service. His agent was present at the battle and immediately went to London with the news. Legend has it that Rothschild learned of Wellington's victory before anyone else in London, but began to demonstratively sell British government bonds. Other traders, seeing that the most informed banker in Europe was getting rid of his securities, decided that Napoleon had won. Panic ensued and prices plummeted. Rothschild's agents then secretly bought up a huge number of bonds at the lowest price. When the official news of the victory reached London, the price of the bonds skyrocketed. Rothschild allegedly made a fortune 20 times greater than his capital. But what is true and what is myth? Historians still argue about this. It is documented that the Rothschilds did indeed have an extremely effective information network. It is confirmed that Nathan received news of the victory before the government. The British foreign minister personally visited Rothschild to learn the news from the continent. This fact is recorded in his memoirs. However, there is no direct evidence of stock market manipulation. There are no records of mass bond sales on June 19th. The story may have been exaggerated or completely fabricated by the Rothschilds' opponents. Anti-Semitic propaganda in the 19th and 20th centuries actively used this story to portray the Rothschilds as unprincipled manipulators who profited from the misfortunes of others. The reality was most likely more prosaic. The Rothschilds did indeed profit from the Napoleonic Wars, but not through stock market manipulation, but through normal banking activities. They arranged loans for the British government and transferred money for Wellington's army across the continent, bypassing the French blockade. These were huge but legal profits. By financing the anti-Napoleonic coalition, the Rothschilds earned a reputation and connections in the highest circles of power. An important question: did Freemasonry help in these operations? Nathan Rothschild was a Freemason, as were many British politicians and military leaders of the time. The Duke of Wellington was not a Freemason, but many of his staff officers were members of lodges. Masonic connections may have facilitated the establishment of contacts, but to claim that Freemasons controlled the war from behind the scenes would be pure fantasy. When it comes to the connection between bankers and Freemasons, it is important to separate documented facts from conspiracy theories. Let's start with what is confirmed by archival records. Nathan Mayer Rothschild joined Emulation Lodge No. 21 in London on October 24, 1802. This is recorded in the official documents of the Grand Lodge of England. Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the founder of the dynasty, was a 33rd-degree Mason of the Scottish Rite, as evidenced by several historical sources, although direct archival confirmation has been lost. But the Rothschilds were not the only bankers in Masonic lodges. In the 19th century, membership in Freemasonry was the norm for the educated European elite. Bankers, industrialists, aristocrats, scientists, military personnel, and politicians all met in lodges. Freemasonry functioned as a private club where business and political contacts were established. The Schiff and Warburg families, closely linked to the Rothschilds through family and business ties, also had Masonic connections. Paul Warburg, one of the founders of the U.S. Federal Reserve System, came from a German banking dynasty with roots in Venetian banking houses. Jacob Schiff, head of Kuhn, Loeb & Co., financed numerous projects in the U.S. and Russia. Although direct evidence of their Masonic membership is controversial, connections to Masonic circles can be traced through business partners and social contacts. In Britain, Freemasonry had deeply penetrated the ruling class. Members of the royal family often became Grand Masters of lodges. Most bankers in the city, London's financial center, were Freemasons. This created a dense network of interconnections between finance and power. But was this a conspiracy, or simply the social structure of the time? It is important to understand the difference. A conspiracy implies a secret plot to seize power or control society. A social network is a natural association of people with similar interests and status. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Masonic lodges were one of the few places where people of different nationalities and religions could meet on equal terms. For Jews such as the Rothschilds, this was especially important in an era when anti-Semitism was the norm. Freemasonry preached the ideas of universal brotherhood, religious tolerance, and enlightenment. For bankers working internationally, these ideas were not empty words, but a practical necessity. To finance projects in different countries, connections, trust, and a common language were needed. Masonic lodges provided this platform. However, it cannot be denied that the concentration of financial power and political influence in the hands of a relatively small group of people united by a secret society inevitably arouses suspicion. When decisions affecting millions are made in closed rooms, where the uninitiated have no access, the question of the democratic nature of such a system arises. This question became particularly acute in the 20th century, when the center of financial power shifted from Europe to America. By the end of the 19th century, the center of world economic power had begun to shift from Europe to America. The continent, which 100 years earlier had been on the periphery, was becoming an industrial giant. And here, new financial dynasties emerged that were destined to rival the European houses. The Morgans and Rockefellers became the American equivalents of the Rothschilds, but with important differences. John Pierpont Morgan was born in 1837 into a family of successful businessmen. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, founded a banking house that worked closely with British financial circles. Young John was educated in Europe and established ties with the Rothschilds and other European bankers. Returning to America, he created J.P. Morgan and Company, which became the most influential bank in the country. Morgan financed the creation of giant corporations. He organized the merger of steel companies into U.S. Steel, the first corporation in history worth more than $1 billion. He controlled railroads, electric companies, and many industrial enterprises. During the crisis of 1907, It was Morgan who saved the American financial system by organizing a consortium of banks to prevent collapse. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1839 into a poor family. He started out in trade, but brilliantly seized the moment when oil became the basis of the new economy. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil, which gradually absorbed or ruined its competitors. By the end of the century, Rockefeller controlled 90% of oil refining in the United States. His fortune exceeded 2% of the country's total gross product. The Morgans and Rockefellers had younger capital than the Rothschilds. They had to integrate into the existing global financial system, where European houses held key positions. But they had an advantage. They operated in a country with enormous growth potential, free from European traditions and restrictions. An important difference from the Rothschilds, the Morgans and Rockefellers were Protestant Christians, not Jews. This gave them certain advantages in American society at the time, where anti-Semitism was widespread. But it also required them to integrate into a different system of connections. The Rockefellers were Baptists. The Morgans were Episcopal Christians. Religious affiliation played an important role in business networks. Were they Freemasons? There is no documentary evidence of John Pierpont Morgan's membership in Masonic lodges. However, his father and many of his partners were Freemasons. Morgan himself belonged to many private clubs and societies. As for Rockefeller, his Masonic connections are also not confirmed by direct documents, although there were many Masons in his circle. But the absence of formal membership does not mean the absence of connections with Masonic circles. More importantly, by the beginning of the 20th century, the Morgans, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Warburgs, and Schiffes had formed a tightly knit network. They were partners, competitors, and sometimes relatives. Their decisions determined which industries would grow, which countries would receive loans, and which governments would survive. And it was this concentration of power that gave rise to the idea of a secret financial government of the world. November 1910, a group of America's most influential bankers secretly travels to Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. Officially, it was a hunting trip for members of an exclusive club. In reality, it was a meeting that would change the world financial system. The participants traveled incognito, using only their first names and avoiding mention of their surnames. Even the servants did not know whom they were serving. Secrecy was absolute. Who were these people? Senator Nelson Aldrich, chairman of the National Monetary Commission and father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, one of the largest banks in the country, Henry Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan Company, Charles Norton, president of First National Bank, Benjamin Strong, representative of the Morgan Banking House, and Paul Warburg, partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, representative of the German banking dynasty. Warburg was a key figure. He came to America from Germany, where his family had been in banking for centuries. Paul was well acquainted with the European central banking system and believed that America needed something similar. After the crisis of 1907, when Morgan single-handedly saved the financial system, it became clear that an institution was needed to act as a lender of last resort. On Jekyll Island, the group spent 9 days in complete isolation. They worked from early morning until late at night, developing a plan to create a central bank for the United States. The task was difficult. America had twice attempted to create a central bank, and both times it had been liquidated due to public mistrust. The idea of centralized control over money caused Americans to fear a banking oligarchy. Therefore, the plan was cunning. Formally, it was not a single organization that was created, but a system of regional reserve banks. 12 banks in different parts of the country, coordinated from Washington. This was supposed to create the illusion of decentralization. In reality, the system functioned as a single entity, controlled from the center. Regional banks were owned by private member banks, but operated under the supervision of the federal government. The plan was ready by January 1911. Aldrich presented it to the National Monetary Commission without mentioning how or where it had been developed. The document was called the Aldrich Plan. Democrats fiercely criticized it as an attempt by bankers to seize control of the country's money. Republicans defended it. For several years, the project was discussed, reworked, and lobbied. As a result, in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act. The final version was a compromise between different political forces, but the technical details remained close to the Jekyll Island plan. America got a central bank that was formally controlled by the government, but actually run by the banking community. The secret of the Jekyll Island meeting was only revealed 20 years later, when the participants began to publish their memoirs. By that time, the Federal Reserve System was firmly established. But the very fact that the central bank was developed in secret by a group of private bankers became a powerful argument for conspiracy theorists. It looked like a classic conspiracy by the financial elite. Take out a dollar bill and look at it closely. On the back, you will see two mysterious images. On the left is an unfinished pyramid with an eye in a triangle above the top, floating in a halo. The Latin inscriptions read, "Annuit coeptis." He approves of the undertaking, and "Novus Ordo Seclorum," New Order of the Ages. On the right is an eagle with a shield, holding an olive branch and arrows in its talons. Above the eagle are 13 stars forming the Star of David. For conspiracy theorists, these symbols are clear evidence of Masonic control over America. The eye in the triangle is a classic Masonic symbol of the all-seeing eye. The unfinished pyramid of 13 tiers is a symbol of hierarchy, and the unfinished project of building a new world order. The Latin inscriptions allegedly point to the plans of a secret government. Even the design of the dollar itself resembles an icon, as intended by Benjamin Franklin, who was a Freemason. But what do the facts say? The Great Seal of the United States, depicted on the dollar bill, was adopted in 1782. Several committees worked on its design for 6 years. Among the creators were indeed Freemasons, including Benjamin Franklin. But there were also non-Masons. The final design was approved by Congress, where Freemasons were in the minority. The eye in the triangle is not exclusively a Masonic symbol. It is an ancient Christian image of the Eye of Providence, God watching over creation. It was used in church art long before the advent of Freemasonry. The unfinished pyramid of 13 levels symbolizes the 13 original states and the idea of the growth of a young nation. The inscription, "New Order of the Ages," refers to the beginning of a new era in history, the creation of a republic free from monarchy. The dollar itself, in its modern form, only appeared in 1935, when President Franklin Roosevelt approved the design with the Great Seal on the reverse side. Roosevelt was a 32nd-degree Mason, and some historians believe that he deliberately promoted Masonic symbolism. But even if this is true, it does not imply a conspiracy. In the 1930s, Freemasonry was a mass movement in America, with millions of Americans belonging to lodges. It is important to understand the historical context. The founding fathers of the United States, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, were indeed Freemasons or shared Masonic ideas. They consciously used symbols of enlightenment, reason, and divine providence. For them, it was not a secret code, but an open declaration of values. America was created as an experiment in enlightened government based on reason rather than tradition. Freemasons did indeed play an important role in the American Revolution and the creation of the state. But were they secret puppet masters or simply active participants in their era? The difference is fundamental. Masonic lodges brought together educated, progressive-minded people. It is not surprising that they were the ones who led the independence movement. This is not a conspiracy, but a sociological pattern. However, it cannot be denied that the deliberate use of esoteric symbols in state symbols creates fertile ground for conspiracy theories. When ancient occult symbols are depicted on money, people inevitably ask questions, and the lack of clear explanations from the authorities only reinforces suspicions. May 1954. A group of the most influential people in Europe and North America gathered at the Bilderberg Hotel in the Dutch town of Oosterbeek. Politicians, bankers, industrialists, military personnel, representatives of the aristocracy. The meeting was strictly confidential. The press was not allowed. The list of participants was not published. The issues discussed were kept secret. Thus was born the Bilderberg Club, an organization that became a symbol of 20th century conspiracy theories. The official purpose of the meeting was noble: to prevent a new world war, strengthen transatlantic ties, and promote mutual understanding between Europe and America. The initiator was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who chaired the meetings until 1975. Representatives of the European aristocracy, heads of major corporations, and leading politicians participated in the organization. A distinctive feature of the Bilderberg meetings is the Chatham House rule. Participants can use the information they receive, but they are not allowed to name the source. They can say, "It was discussed at the meeting," but they cannot say, "Minister X said." This creates an atmosphere of openness. Participants can speak freely, without fear of public consequences. But to outside observers, such secrecy seems suspicious. Since 1954, meetings have been held annually in different countries. The list of participants includes prime ministers, presidents of major banks, directors of international corporations, CEOs of media companies, and heads of special services. About 130 to 150 people receive invitations. 2/3 are from Europe, 1/3 from North America. About 1/3 of the participants change each year. The rest are permanent members. Were there Freemasons among the participants? Undoubtedly. Prince Bernhard was a Freemason. Many politicians and businessmen who attended the meetings were members of lodges. But Freemasonry was only one of many networks to which the participants belonged. More important were connections through corporate boards of directors, political parties, aristocratic families, and university communities. The Rothschild and Rockefeller families are regularly represented at the meetings. David Rockefeller was an honorary member of the steering committee until his death in 2017. Various representatives of the Rothschild family participated in different years. This is a fact that the organization does not hide. But does this mean that the Bilderberg Club rules the world? Critics claim that decisions determining the fate of countries are made at these meetings. Presidents are appointed, wars are planned, and economic policy is determined. Bill Clinton attended a meeting a year before being elected president. Tony Blair did too. Coincidence or selection of future leaders? Conspiracy theorists see this as proof of a secret world government. The reality is more complex. The Bilderberg Club is a forum for informal communication among elites. It is a place where issues can be discussed without cameras and protocols. No decisions are made there in the legal sense, but a consensus is formed. A common understanding of issues emerges, and personal contacts are established. And this influence can be more powerful than formal decisions. The problem is not that the meetings take place. The problem is the lack of transparency. When people who make decisions affecting billions meet in secret, democratic control is impossible. Citizens do not know what is being discussed, what ideas are being promoted, whose interests are being represented. This creates a gap between the elites and society, fuels conspiracy theories, and undermines trust in institutions of power. One of the most persistent conspiracy theories is that international bankers financed revolutions and wars on both sides, profiting from conflicts. How true is this? Let's start with the facts that can be verified. The French Revolution of 1789 was largely caused by the bankruptcy of the royal treasury. Louis XVI got into debt by financing the American Revolution against Britain. The kingdom borrowed from many bankers, including European banking houses. When the treasury was empty, the government could not pay its creditors. Attempts to raise taxes sparked popular protests. The revolution swept away the monarchy, but the debts remained. The Jacobins came to power and announced a partial debt default. The bankers lost enormous sums of money. This contradicts the theory that they organized the revolution. Why destroy a debtor who cannot repay the money? It would have been more rational to preserve the monarchy and restructure the debt. But the revolution had its own logic, beyond financial calculations. The Napoleonic Wars were indeed financed by bankers on both sides. The Rothschilds simultaneously lent money to the British government and provided services to various European powers. This is documented. But does that mean they organized the wars? No. The wars arose from geopolitical contradictions. The bankers merely provided the tools to wage them. The American Civil War of 1861-1865 gave rise to the theory that European bankers supported the Confederacy in order to split the United States. Indeed, the southern states received loans from European financiers, mainly British. The North was financed by internal resources and the issuance of new money, the famous greenbacks. President Lincoln refused high-interest loans, preferring to print his own money. There is a theory that Lincoln was killed on the orders of bankers who were unhappy about losing control of the American monetary system. John Wilkes Booth, the president's assassin, was allegedly an agent of international financiers. There is no evidence to support this. Booth was a fanatical supporter of the Confederacy, and his motives can be fully explained by ideology. But the lack of evidence does not stop conspiracy theorists. The Russian Revolution of 1917 has also been overgrown with theories about financing. It is claimed that the Bolsheviks were sponsored by German banks and American financiers, including Jacob Schiff of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Germany did indeed help Lenin return to Russia, hoping that the revolution would take Russia out of the war. This was a strategic calculation, not a conspiracy by bankers. Jacob Schiff financed anti-Tsarist forces in Russia, but not the Bolsheviks. He supported liberals and moderate socialists, hoping for democratic reforms and an improvement in the situation of the Jews. When the Bolsheviks came to power and nationalized the banks, Schiff lost all his investments. If he organized the revolution, he did so extremely unsuccessfully. The pattern repeats itself. Bankers lend to governments and movements, hoping for profit or political gains. Sometimes their calculations pay off. Often, they do not. Revolutions and wars have their own dynamics that financiers cannot control. They can influence and push, but they cannot control. The difference between influence and control is critical to understanding the real role of financial elites in history. When exactly did the idea of a Masonic banking conspiracy arise? The history of conspiracy theories is as interesting as the history of the events themselves. The first Masonic conspiracy theories appeared as early as the 18th century, shortly after Freemasonry became a mass phenomenon. In 1797, French priest Augustin Barruel published Memoirs with some notes on the history of the Jacobins, in which he claimed that the French Revolution was the result of a conspiracy by Freemasons and Illuminati. The Illuminati was a secret society founded in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt in 1776. It existed for only 10 years before being banned by the authorities. But in Barruel's theory, the Illuminati infiltrated Masonic lodges and used them to prepare for the revolution. The theory was absurd but popular. It explained frightening events with a simple scheme. There are evil conspirators who planned everything. This was reassuring because it offered a clear explanation for the chaos. Conservatives who lost power in the revolution willingly believed that they were overthrown not by the masses, but by a secret organization. In the 19th century, a Jewish component was added to the Masonic conspiracy. As Jewish bankers, especially the Rothschilds, gained influence, anti-Semites began to combine anti-Jewish and anti-Masonic theories. The idea of a Jewish Masonic conspiracy emerged. Jews allegedly infiltrated Masonic lodges and used them to seize power over the Christian world. The culmination was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forgery produced by the Russian secret police around 1903. The document allegedly revealed the plans of Jewish leaders to establish world domination through control of finance, the press, and politics. The protocols were exposed as a forgery as early as 1920, but continue to circulate to this day. The 20th century added new layers. After the creation of the Federal Reserve System, theories emerged about a conspiracy of bankers who had seized control of American money. Edward Griffin's book, The Creatures from Jekyll Island, published in 1994, popularized the idea that the Fed is a private bank owned by the Rothschilds and other dynasties that are robbing the American people through inflation and debt. The Internet age has taken conspiracy theories to a new level. Now anyone can create a video or article explaining how Illuminati, Freemasons, and bankers control the world. Theories have become more complex, covering everything from the September 11th terrorist attacks to pandemics. Old characters often find themselves at the center. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Bilderberg Club. Why are these theories so persistent? Psychologists explain that conspiracy theories satisfy the human need to understand a complex world. It is easier to believe in an evil conspiracy than to admit that history is chaotic and events are often random. Conspiracy theories give a sense of control. If everything bad happens according to plan, then it is possible to uncover and stop that plan. In addition, there is a grain of truth in conspiracy theories. The financial elites do have disproportionate influence. Decisions are made in closed circles. Masonic and other networks do exist. But conspiracy theorists draw fantastical conclusions about total control from real inequalities in power. The reality lies somewhere between the official version of "everything is random" and the conspiracy theorists' "everything is planned." It is time to separate fact from fantasy. What can be proven with documents, and what remains speculation? Academic historians and researchers have done a tremendous amount of work studying archives, financial records, memoirs, and official documents. What have they discovered? Fact 1. Many influential bankers of the 19th and 20th centuries were Freemasons. This is confirmed by the membership lists of lodges, which are open or semi-open in most countries. Nathan Rothschild was a Freemason. This is documented. Many of the partners of the Morgans, the Schiff and Warburg bankers had Masonic connections. It is pointless to deny this. Fact 2. Masonic lodges served as a place for establishing business contacts. In an era when there were no telephones, internet, or fast communications, personal networks were of great importance. Lodges brought together people of different professions and nationalities, creating channels for exchanging information and organizing deals. It was a legal and socially acceptable form of networking. Fact 3. There were private clubs and organizations where elites discussed politics and economics informally. The Bilderberg Club, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Club of Rome are all real organizations. Their membership lists are partially known. They do indeed bring together politicians, bankers, industrialists, and scientists. But then, the problems with evidence begin. There are no documents confirming the existence of a single control center. There are no minutes of meetings where decisions were made to start wars, organize revolutions, or manipulate the economy. All there is circumstantial evidence, interpretations, and assumptions. In his book, Tragedy and Hope, published in 1966, researcher Carol Quiogli described the existence of an informal network of Anglo-American financiers working to strengthen ties between Britain and the United States. Quigley had access to closed archives and described the real mechanisms of influence. But he did not talk about a secret conspiracy. He described people who sincerely believed that they were acting in the interests of peace and stability, even though their methods were elitist and undemocratic. Professor Anthony Sutton researched the financing of the Bolshevik Revolution and Nazi Germany by American capital. He found documentary evidence that American corporations and banks did indeed do business with the USSR and the Third Reich. But this was commercial activity, not a political conspiracy. Capitalism is willing to trade with anyone if it is profitable. The problem with conspiracy theories is that they mistake influence for control, coincidence of interests for conspiracy, and informal connections for a secret government. Yes, the financial elites influence politics. Yes, they have access to power that is unavailable to ordinary people. Yes, sometimes they coordinate their actions to achieve common goals. But that does not mean there is an all-powerful organization controlling the world according to a single plan. Academic history shows that reality is more complex and interesting than conspiracy theories. Power is distributed among many groups with conflicting interests. The financial elites are not monolithic. They compete with each other. The Rothschilds rivaled the Morgans, and British interests conflicted with American ones. A single conspiracy would require a level of coordination incompatible with human nature and the realities of capitalist competition. What remains of the great financial dynasties in the 21st century? The names Rothschild and Rockefeller are still familiar, but does their real influence match their legendary reputation? The Rothschild family continues to be involved in banking, but on a scale incomparable to that of the 19th century. Rothschild & Co. is an investment bank operating in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, asset management, and private banking. The company's capitalization is about $10 billion. This is substantial, but incomparable to giants such as J.P. Morgan Chase, with a capitalization of over $500 billion, or BlackRock, which manages $10 trillion in assets. The modern Rothschilds are still rich and influential. Baron David de Rothschild headed the family bank until 2018. The family owns wineries, real estate, and art collections, but they do not determine the fate of the global economy. The era of family banking houses is over. Power has shifted to huge corporations with dispersed ownership and professional management. The Rockefeller family is also far from its former power. Standard Oil was broken up by antitrust legislation in 1911. The descendants own fragments, but do not control them. The Rockefeller Center in New York was sold to Japanese investors in 1989. Family foundations are involved in philanthropy and investments, but they do not determine economic policy. David Rockefeller, who died in 2017 at the age of 101, was the last representative of the old guard. He headed Chase Manhattan Bank and was an active member of the Bilderberg Club, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. He was called the last old-school banker. His death marked the end of an era when family name meant more than corporate structure. Modern financial power belongs not to dynasties, but to institutions. The Federal Reserve System, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank are the organizations that determine monetary policy. The largest investment funds, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, manage trillions and are the largest shareholders in most public corporations. It is an interesting paradox. Conspiracy theorists continue to focus on the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, whose real influence has declined. The real centers of financial power, huge investment funds and central banks, remain out of focus. Perhaps this is because conspiracy theories need personalities, families, and conspirators. Faceless corporate bureaucracy is not suitable for dramatic narratives. But there is continuity. The people who run modern financial institutions often have connections to the same closed networks. They studied at the same universities, Harvard, Yale, Oxford. They belong to the same clubs. They attend the same conferences. The social networks of the elite have not disappeared. They have transformed. Freemasonry has lost its former significance. In the 21st century, it is perceived more as an anachronism, a club for retirees, rather than a center of power. Young bankers and entrepreneurs prefer other formats: business conferences, investment forums, startup accelerators. But the function is the same: to create closed networks for exchanging information and organizing deals. The question remains: how democratic is a system where key decisions are made in closed networks of elites? It does not matter whether these networks are called Masonic lodges, Ivy League clubs, or Davos forums. What matters is that access to them is limited, and their influence on society is enormous. This is a fundamental problem of modern democracy that has not been solved in any country in the world. We have come a long way from the creation of the Bank of England in 1694 to today's global financial institutions. We have explored the links between bankers and Freemasonry, examined the legends of the Battle of Waterloo, studied the mystery of Jekyll Island, and analyzed conspiracy theories. The time has come to answer the main question: do Freemasons and bankers really rule the world? Or is this a myth? The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between the extremes. On the one hand, conspiracy theories about the all-powerful Illuminati controlling every event according to a single plan do not stand up to factual scrutiny. History is full of coincidences, mistakes, and unpredictable consequences. If there were an all-powerful conspiracy, the world would look completely different, more orderly and predictable. On the other hand, it is just as naive to deny the influence of the financial elite. A small group of people controls a disproportionately large share of the world's wealth and, consequently, power. They have access to governments, determine economic policy, and influence information flows. Their decisions affect the lives of billions of people who have never participated in making those decisions. Freemasonry played an important but not decisive role in this story. In the 18th and 19th centuries, lodges served as meeting places for enlightened elites who shared progressive ideas. Bankers, politicians, industrialists, and scientists found in Freemasonry a platform for coordination. This provided advantages in an era of slow communications and closed societies. But Freemasonry was not the cause, but the consequence. It was not the lodges that created financial power, but influential people who used the lodges to strengthen their existing influence. Masonic ideas of brotherhood and enlightenment attracted a certain type of people. Not surprisingly, many of them had careers in business and politics. By the 21st century, Freemasonry had lost its significance, but the very principle of closed networks of elites remained. The formats changed, from Masonic lodges to business clubs, from secret meetings to conferences in Davos, from handshakes in temples to deals on the sidelines of international forums. The essence remained the same. A small group of people coordinates actions outside of public control. The real problem is not Freemasons as such, but the concentration of power and the lack of transparency. When decisions on monetary policy that affect inflation, wages, and the savings of millions of people are made in the closed halls of central banks, it is a problem for democracy. When the largest investment funds control the shares of most corporations and vote as they see fit without asking the owners of pension savings, it is a problem of accountability. 19th century banking dynasties had faces, names, and family histories. This made them understandable targets for criticism and conspiracy theories. Modern financial structures are faceless, distributed, and difficult to understand. But their influence is no less, and perhaps even greater. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets, more than the GDP of any country except the US and China. But few people know who runs BlackRock. What should we do with this knowledge? Conspiracy theories offer a simple answer: expose and destroy the conspiracy. But this is an illusion. The problem is not specific individuals or families, but the system itself. Capitalism naturally concentrates capital. Power follows money. Freemasonry and other secret societies are merely tools that elites use for coordination. The real solution lies in politics, not conspiracy theories. Demand transparency from financial institutions. Regulate the concentration of economic power. Create mechanisms for democratic control over central banks and large corporations. This is difficult, time-consuming, and requires political will. But it is the only way if the goal is not just to find scapegoats, but to truly change the balance of power in society. Freemasons do not rule the world. Bankers are not omnipotent, but the system they helped create affects us all. Understanding this system, seeing the real mechanisms of power, separating facts from myths, that is what gives us real knowledge. Not so that we can fear secret conspiracies, but so that we can clearly see the real problems and seek real solutions.